The day Adaora married Desmond Okura was the happiest day of her life. He was everything she had ever dreamed of: wealthy, charming, and deeply devoted to her, or so she thought. As they exchanged vows before family and friends, she felt like the luckiest woman in the world. Mima Chinya, the old woman from her village who had known Desmond's family for years, had pulled her aside just before the wedding, her wrinkled hands gripping Adaora's tightly. "My daughter," Mima Chinya whispered, her voice laced with concern. "Not all that glitters is gold. A man like Desmond, he does not give without expecting something in return." Adaora had laughed, brushing off the warning. "Mama Chinya, you worry too much. Desmond loves me. He treats me like a queen." The old woman sighed, her wise eyes filled with something Adaora couldn't quite understand then. A king may crown his queen, but what use is a crown if your soul is shackled? At the time, Adaora thought she was simply being superstitious. But she soon learned the meaning of those words. The first few months of their marriage were blissful. Desmond showered her with expensive gifts, planned lavish vacations, and ensured that she never wanted for anything. But the first sign of trouble came one evening after a party they had attended together. She had been laughing and chatting with one of Desmond's business associates, unaware that her husband was watching her closely the entire time. When they got home, the warmth in his eyes had disappeared. As she placed her clutch on the dresser, Desmond stood behind her, his voice low and cold. "You were laughing too much tonight," he said. "Smiling at other men. A wife should know her place." She turned to him, confused. "Desmond, I was only being polite." The loud crash of a glass slamming onto the table made her flinch. He took a step closer, his jaw tight. "You are mine, Adaora. Do you understand?" His voice sent a chill down her spine. She nodded slowly, not wanting to anger him further. That was the first crack. Over time, the cracks deepened. Desmond dictated what she could wear, who she could talk to, even when she could leave the house. When she tried to push back, his patience would snap like a brittle thread. At first, it was just words, sharp and cutting. Then, it was a grip on her wrist, a push against the wall, and eventually, marks she had to cover with makeup. But Desmond was careful. He never left bruises where others could see. She felt herself shrinking, the once vibrant Adaora disappearing. One day, while sitting in their large, empty house, she scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of herself before Desmond, before she had to force her smiles. A notification popped up on her screen. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you ever need help, I'm here. Detective Bayo." Her breath hitched. She didn't know who he was, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Adaora had never met Detective Bayo before, but he had been quietly investigating Desmond for months. Unknown to Adaora, Desmond had a history, several whispers of past wives or partners who had mysteriously vanished or withdrawn their complaints out of fear. He was powerful, influential, and had always managed to silence those who dared to expose him. But Bayo wasn't easily intimidated. One day, while Adaora was out running errands, one of the rare times Desmond allowed her to leave the house, Bayo spotted her at a cafe. He had been tracking Desmond's movements and recognized her immediately as his wife. He noticed how she glanced over her shoulder, how her hands trembled slightly as she handed over money at the counter, how she kept her phone close but never made a call. She looked like a woman trapped in an invisible cage. That night, after confirming her identity, Bayo sent her a message from an untraceable number. She had stared at the message for a long time, terrified that Desmond would somehow see it. She didn't respond. She didn't dare. But she didn't delete it either. Days passed. The situation at home worsened. Desmond's control tightened, and Adaora realized that if she didn't leave soon, she might never get another chance. She began planning her escape. She waited until Desmond had left for a business trip and packed a small bag. Her hands shook as she zipped it shut, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She needed to get out before he returned. But fate had other plans. As she crept toward the front door, her phone vibrated against the wooden floor. The sound was deafening in the silence. She froze. Then, a shadow moved behind her. "Going somewhere, wife?" Desmond's voice was calm, almost amused. Slowly, she turned to face him. His suit jacket was draped over his arm, his tie slightly loosened, but his eyes burned with something dark. She forced herself to stand tall. "I need some space, Desmond." He stepped closer, backing her into the wall. "You don't need space. You need to understand that you belong here. I am not your possession," she whispered. The smirk on his face faltered, replaced by something dangerous. "You ungrateful." For the first time, she had truly seen the depth of his rage. She knew he would never let her go. And so, with shaking hands, she did the only thing she could. She pressed send on the one message she had been too afraid to write until now. "Help me." She didn't have to say more. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights filled the compound. The door burst open, and Detective Bayo stepped inside. That was the moment Adaora realized something. Bayo had been watching. Waiting. Not for her to be saved, but for her to choose freedom. A loud bang echoed through the house as the front door was kicked open. Flashing red and blue lights filled the room. Desmond Okwara, step away from her. Detective Bayo and several officers stormed in. Desmond's face twisted in rage, but for the first time, he was powerless. He turned to Adaora, betrayal flashing in his eyes. "You called the police on me." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, and as the officers led him away, Adaora took her first full breath in years. The next morning, she stood by the window of her new apartment, sunlight streaming through the glass. She was free. No longer bound by fear, no longer shackled by love. Mema Chinye's words echoed in her mind. "A king may crown his queen, but what use is a crown if your soul is shackled?" Adaora finally understood.
Please press subscribe button. It help us bring you more interesting stories. Your support keep us going. Please subscribe.